feel free, or if you want to write something up that you think is important, just contact me. All you guys. Again, the invite's always out there. If anybody wants to agree or disagree, whatever, let's rock it. It'll be great. Birdhouse, hey man. Dustin, yes, you rock. And Harry, hi Harry. I got to say hi to Harry early. HH, I said HH. All right. And Dustin says, if she had only bought the parked slightly off the driveway permit. Yeah, what's funny is if she hadn't been growing her grass as well, she wouldn't have had a problem. Like, oh, we got blight about 6 inches in. Jeez. And it's just so, like, why do you even have to think about stuff like that? Like, it's like, I had to go to I was getting sick. My son had a fever. I was bringing him, like, what? It's just insane. It's totally insane. Now I understand why Ambrose Bierce left the United States. Why he took off. He disappeared. What was that, like 1911 or something, 1910 or something? I can't remember. Yeah, Ambrose Bierce writing, Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge and all that great stuff. He was terrific. All right, let's get into fiction right now, everybody. Let's rock the house. Gonna rock this town. Rock it. Thank you again. That was so nice of you. That really, really is great. And it's been a crazy, crazy week. Utterly nuts. I'll give you an information on Monday. I got this device to try to help fight this long COVID stuff. And it's just like nothing you can imagine. It's just incredible. I mean, literally like survivability level, just constant boxing match. It's really intense. And so I got this thing for the vagus nerve stimulators, a company called Pulsetto. And I was in David Knight's chat earlier. Jason was in there, and I think Yona was there too. And I mentioned that I had it on, and it was literally like it was like Ghostbusters when Bill Murray was zapping the kid. And he was going after the girl with the ESP test. I was like, oh, it was so bad. I know, it was good. Pulsetto, they're an advertiser. Anyway, I'm going to try it. It's supposed to help out with mitochondrial response and stuff like that. So we're going to go now, everybody. You can look up some interesting stuff about Pulsetto. It's very interesting stuff. And the importance of mitochondrial, the spike protein has attacked the vagus nerve. Very interesting stuff. And then there's the bilateral stellate ganglion block, which actually sounds very complicated and dangerous, but it actually is not. And it was somebody in David's chat. And it might have been Dustin. I don't know who suggested it. I don't know who it was now. I can't remember. Let's rock it. Fiction, you got it. And I want to read you a little poem. I'm working on a poem, just a quick one. Time to start. Outer Limits.
Nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
All right, Outer Limits. I love it. Good stuff. I've got all that on box set and all the Twilight Zone on box set, of course. So I'm going to start things off with a little poem. I'm just working on this. It's not the final version of it, but it's called Small Man. I usually go with one-word titles, but this one, I might just call it Smam. It's like spam, All right, so this is the poem I'm working on. It goes, a small man sat next to me. Avatar of destiny. I'll show you how to be free. He told me things about life, the strife, finding a wife, but never without a price. Sometimes I get the guts. Sometimes I think I'm nuts. Sometimes I see that man. I see through the words to the plan, and I see what he meant by free. That's a man who's robbing me, taking time, my liberty, claiming he's my protector. The small man with the plan never dies, lives again, sits down, pretends he's a friend. Time to rise, rise and shine. To live in peace, live as one, free of small men who think it's fun to drain our souls, hit and run. I'll live my life, find a wife, face the strife, pack a knife, 'cause small men will come again. So I'm just working on that. It's not the final version of it, but see what you think about that one. Now, I want to go with a guy who, as I mentioned, when I worked at Outer Limits, I got to meet Joe Stefano. Joe Stefano wrote the script for Psycho. Stefano was one of the original creators of the Outer Limits. And so I want to read to you a story by Robert Bloch, the writer of Psycho. But before I do, I want to show you, if you are a Christian or you're curious about Christianity, I want to show you a book by a friend of mine. I'm hoping to get Dan on the show. I've known Dan for a long time. Dan Cohane. It looks like Keohane. I've done interviews with Dan before. He's got a great anthology called Christmas Trees and Monkeys. One of the stories actually has a giant gorilla on the 3 radio towers for WGIR AM in Manchester, New Hampshire, next to the Merrimack River. I read that story, got to know Dan, and then I ended up working for WGIR, and my show was broadcast from those towers. I'm like, Dan, you're never going to believe where I'm working. He goes, what? I was like, I'm working at the radio station where you based your story. He goes, what? I'm like, yeah, man. My voice is coming out of those towers now. So that was pretty wild. So again, it's stories from the Psalms, and I read the first one. It's really, really good. And Dan is a Christian writer, and I got to know Dan because he would go down to the Nikon convention that down at Roger Williams University in Rhode Island, right on the coastline. I haven't gone down for quite a while. That's where I got to know F. Paul and Tom Monteleone and those guys. So yeah, but I want to read to you right now a story from Robert Bloch. Mysteries of the Worm is the collection. This is from Chaosium, and they're the ones they've done lots of Lovecraftian books. And I want to go with this one. It is, where is it? Yeah, it's The Grinning Ghoul. So I think this is the one that I selected. I hope I've got it right. Might not be this one. Hold on a second. Here it is. The Faceless God. This is the one I want. Now, this is pretty small printing. It's a fairly short story, but the printing is a little bit small. So this will probably be about a 20-minute long story. The Faceless God by Robert Bloch. All right. The thing on the torture rack began to moan. There was a grating sound as the lever stretched the iron bed still one more space in length. The moaning grew to a piercing shriek of utter agony. Ah, said Dr. Stuttgart. We have him at last. He bent over the tortured man on the iron grill and smiled tenderly into the anguished face. His eyes, tinged with delicate amusement, took in every detail of the body before him. The swollen legs, raw and angry from the embrace of the fiery boot. The lacerated back and shoulders, still crimson from the kiss of the lash. The bloody, mangled remnants of a chest crushed by the caress of the spiked coffin. With gentle solicitude, he surveyed the finishing touches applied by the rack itself, the dislocated shoulders, the twisted torso, the crushed and broken fingers, and the dangling tendons in the lower limbs. Then he turned his attention to the old man's tormented countenance once again. He laughed slowly in a voice like the tinkling of a bell, and then he spoke. "Well, Hassan, I do not think you will prove stubborn any longer in the face of such eloquent persuasion. Come now, tell me, where can I find this idol of which you speak?" The butchered victim began to sob, and the Dr. Stuttgart, was forced to kneel beside the bed of pain in order to understand the man's incoherent mumblings. For perhaps 20 minutes, the creature groaned on, and then at last fell silent. Dr. Stuttgart rose to his feet once more, a satisfied twinkle in his genial eyes. He made a brief motion to one of the blacks operating the rack machinery. The fellow nodded and went over to the living horror on the instrument. The horror was crying now. Its tears were blood. The black man drew his sword. It swished upward, then cleaved down once again. There was a dull sound of crunching impact, and then a tiny fountain spurted upward, spreading a scarlet blot upon the wall behind. Dr. Stuttgart went out of the room, bolted the door behind him, and climbed the steps to the house above. As he raised the barred trap door, he saw that the sun was shining. The doctor began to whistle. He was very pleased. He had good reason to be. For several years, the doctor had been what is vulgarly known as an adventurer. He had been a smuggler of antiquities, an exploiter of labor on the Upper Nile, and had at times sunk so low as to participate in the forbidden black goods trade that flourished at certain ports along the Red Sea. He had come out to Egypt many years ago as an attaché at an archaeological expedition from which he had been summarily dismissed. The reason for his dismissal is not known, but it was rumored that he had been caught trying to appropriate certain of the expeditionary trophies. After his exposure and subsequent disgrace, he had disappeared for a while. Several years later, he had come back to Cairo and set up an establishment in the native quarter. It was here that he fell into the unscrupulous habits of business, which had earned for him a dubious reputation and a sizable profit. He seemed well satisfied with both. At the present time, he was a man of perhaps 45 years of age, short and heavy-set, with a bullet-shaped head that rested on broad, ape-like shoulders. His thick torso and bulging paunch were supported by a pair of spindly legs that contrasted oddly with the upper portions of his beefy body. Despite his Falstaffian appearance, he was a hard and ruthless man. His piggish eyes were filled with greed. His fleshy mouth was lustful. His only natural smile was one of avarice. It was his covetous nature that had led him to this present adventure. Ordinarily, he was not a credulous man. The usual tales of lost pyramids, buried treasure, and stolen mummies did not impress him. He preferred something more substantial. a contraband consignment of rugs, a bit of smuggled opium, something in the line of illicit human merchandise. These were things he could appreciate and understand. But this case was different. Extraordinary as it sounded, it meant big money. Stuttgart was smart enough to know that many of the great discoveries of Egyptology had been prompted by just such wild rumors as the one he had heard. He also knew the difference between improbable truth and spurious invention. This story sounded like the truth. In brief, it ran as follows. A certain party of nomads, while engaged in a secret journey with a cargo of illegitimately obtained goods, were traversing a special route of their own. They did not feel that the regular caravan lanes were healthful for them to follow. While traveling near a certain spot, they had accidentally espied a curious rock or stone in the sands. The thing had evidently been buried, but long years of shifting and swirling among the dunes above it had served to uncover a portion of the object. They had stopped to inspect it at close range and thereby made a startling discovery. The thing projecting from the sand was the head of a statue, an ancient Egyptian statue with the triple crown of gold. Its black body was still submerged, but the head seemed to be in perfect preservation. It was a very peculiar thing, that head, and none of the natives could or would recognize the deity, though the caravan leaders questioned them very closely. The whole thing was an unfathomable mystery. A perfectly preserved statue of an unknown god buried all alone in the southern desert, a long way from any oasis and 200 miles from the smallest village. Evidently, the caravan men realized something of its uniqueness, for they ordered the two boulders which lay nearby be placed on top of the idol as a marker in case they ever returned. The men did as they were ordered, though they were obviously reluctant, and kept muttering prayers beneath their breath. They seemed very much afraid of the buried icon and only reiterated their ignorance when questioned further concerning that thing. After the boulders had been placed, the expedition was forced to journey on, and for some time did not permit themselves to unearth the curious figure in its entirety or attempt to carry it with them in any way. When they returned to the north, they told their story, and as most tales were in the habit of doing, it came to the ears of Dr. Stuttgart. Stuttgart thought rapidly. It was quite evident that the original discoverers of the idol did not attach any great importance to the find. For this reason, the doctor might easily return to the spot and unearth the statue without any trouble, once he knew exactly where it was located. Stuttgart felt that it was worth finding. If it had been a treasure yarn, now he would have scoffed and unhesitatingly put it down as a cock and bull story of the usual variety. But a story about an idol rather than a treasure, that was different. He could understand why an ignorant band of Arab smugglers might ignore such a discovery. He could also realize that such a discovery might prove more valuable to him than all the treasure in Egypt. It was easy for him to remember the vague clues and wild hints that had prompted the findings of early explorers. They had followed up many blind leads when first they plumbed the pyramids and racked the temple ruins. All of them were tomb looters at heart, but their ravishings had made them rich and famous. Why not him, then? If the tale were true, And this idol, not only buried, but totally unknown as a deity in perfect condition and in such an out-of-the-way locality, well, these facts would create a furor when he exhibited his find. He would be famous. Who knew what hitherto untrodden fields he might open up in archaeology? It was well worth chancing. But he must not arouse any suspicion. He dared not inquire about the place from any Arabs who had been there. That would immediately cause talk. No, he must get his directions from a native in the band. Accordingly, 2 of his servants picked up Hassan, the old camel driver, and brought him before Stuttgarter inside his house. But Hassan, when questioned, looked very much afraid. He refused to talk. To Stuttgarter. Well, as we have seen, he conducted him into his little reception room, into the cellar, where he had been wont to entertain certain recalcitrant guests in the past. Here, the doctor, whose knowledge of anatomy stood him in good stead, was able to cajole his visitor into speaking by the methods we have just witnessed. So Dr. Stuttgarter emerged from the cellar in a very pleasant frame of mind. He was rubbing his fat hands when he looked at the map to verify his information, and he went out to dinner with a smiling face. 2 days later, he was ready to start. He had hired a small number of natives so as not to excite undue investigation, and given out to his business acquaintances that he was about to embark on a special trip. He engaged a strange dragoman and made sure that the fellow would keep his mouth shut. There were several swift camels in the train and a number of extra donkeys harnessed to a large empty cart. He took food and water for 6 days, for he intended to return via riverboat only. After the arrangements were completed, the party assembled one morning at a certain spot unknown to official eyes, and the expedition began. It was on the morning of the 4th day that they arrived at last. Stuttgarter saw the stones from his precarious perch atop the leading camel. He swore delightedly, and despite the hovering heat, dismounted and raced over to the spot where the 2 boulders lay. A moment later, he called the company to a hasty halt and issued orders for the immediate erection of the tents and the usual preparations for encampment. Utterly disregarding the intolerable warmth of the growing day, he saw to it that the sweating natives did a thorough job, and then, without allowing them a moment's rest, he instructed them to remove the massive rocks from their resting place. A crew of straining men managed to topple them over at last and clear away the underlying sand. In a few moments, there was a loud cry from the gang of laborers as a black and sinister head came into view. It was a triple-crown blasphemy. Great spiky cones adorned the top of the ebony diadem, and beneath them were hidden intricately executed designs. He bent down and examined them. They were monstrous, both in subject and in execution. He saw the writhing worm-like shapes of primal monsters and headless, slimy creatures from the stars. There were bloated beasts in the robes of men and ancient Egyptian gods in hideous combat with squirming demons from the Gulf. Some of the designs were foul beyond description, and others hinted of unclean terrors that were old when the world was young. But all were evil. And Stuttgarter cold and callous though he was, could not gaze at them without feeling a horror that ate at his brain. As for the natives, they were openly frightened. The moment that the top of the image came into view, they began to jabber hysterically. They retreated to the side of the excavation and began to argue and mumble, pointing occasionally at the statue or at the kneeling figure of the doctor. Absorbed in his inspection, Stuttgart failed to catch the body of their remarks or note the air of menace that radiated from the sullen dragoman. Once or twice he heard some vague references to the name Nyarlathotep and a few allusions to the demon messenger. After completing his scrutiny, the doctor rose to his feet and ordered the men to proceed with the excavation. No one moved. Impatiently, he repeated his command. The natives stood by, their heads hung, but their faces were stolid. At last, the dragoman stepped forward and began to harangue the Effendi. He and his men would never have come with their master had they known that they were expected to do this. They would not touch the statue of the god, and they warned the doctor to keep his hands off. It was bad business to incur the wrath of the old god, the secret one. But perhaps he had not heard of Nyarlathotep. He was the eldest god of all Egypt, of all the world. He was the god of resurrection, the black messenger of Carnarer. There was a legend that one day he would arise and bring the old and dead to life. The curse was one to be avoided. Stuttgart, listening, began to lose his temper. Angrily, he interrupted, ordering the men to stop gawking and resume their work. He backed up his command with 2 Colt 32 revolvers. He would take all the blame for the desecration, he shouted, and he was not afraid of any damn stone idol in the world. The natives seemed properly impressed both by the revolvers and his fluent profanity, and they began to dig again, timidly averting their eyes from the statue's form. A few hours' work sufficed for the men to uncover the idol. If the crown of its stony head had hinted of horror, the face and body openly proclaimed it. The image was obscene and shockingly malignant. There was an indescribably alien quality about it. It was ageless, unchanging, eternal. Not a scratch marred its black and crudely chiseled surface. During all its many-centuried burial there in the sand, there had been no weathering upon the fiendishly carven features. Stuttgart saw it now as it must have looked when it was first buried, and the sight was not good to see. It resembled a miniature sphinx, a life-size sphinx with the wings of a vulture and the body of a hyena. There were talons and claws, and upon the squatting bestial body rested a massive anthropomorphic head bearing the ominous triple crowns whose dread designs had so singularly excited the natives. But the worst and by far the most hideous feature was the lack of a face upon the ghastly thing. It was a faceless god, the winged, faceless god of ancient myth, Nyarlathotep, mighty messenger, stalker among the stars, the lord of the desert. When Stuttgart completed his examination at last, he became almost hysterically happy. He grinned triumphantly into that blank and loathsome countenance, grinned into that faceless orifice that yawned as vacantly as the black void beyond the suns. In his enthusiasm, he failed to notice the furtive whispers of the natives and the guides, and disregarded their fearsome glances at the unclean Eidolon. He had not done so. Had he not done so, he would have been a wiser man. For these men knew, as all Egypt knows, that Nyarlathotep is the master of evil. Not for nothing had his temples been demolished, his statues destroyed, and his priestcraft crucified in the olden days. There were dark and terrible reasons for prohibiting his worship and omitting his name from the Book of the Dead. All references to the Faceless One were long since deleted from the sacred manuscripts, and great pains had been taken to ignore some of his godly attributes or assign them to some milder deity. In Thoth, Set, Bubastis, and Sebek, we can trace some of the master's grisly endowments. It was he, in the most archaic of the chronicles, who was ruler of the underworld. It was he who became the patron of sorcery and the black arts. Once, he alone had ruled, and men knew him in all lands under many names. But that time passed. Men turned away from the worship of evil and reverenced the good. They did not care for the gruesome sacrifice the dark god demanded, nor the way his priests ruled. At last, the cult was suppressed, and by common consent, all references to it were forever banned, and its records destroyed. But Nyarlathotep had come out of the desert, according to the legend, and to the desert he had been returned. Idols were set up in hidden places among the sands, and there the thin, fanatical ranks of true believers still leapt and capered in naked worship, where the cries of shrieking victims echoed only to the ears of the blackened night. So his legend remained and was handed down in the secret ways of the earth. Time passed. In the north, the ice flow receded and Atlantis fell. New peoples overran the land, but the desert folk remained. They viewed the building of the pyramids with amused and cynical eyes. Wait, they counseled. When the day arrived at last, Nyarlathotep would come out of the desert, and then woe unto all of Egypt. For the pyramids would shatter into dust, and temples would be crumbled to ruin. Sunken cities in the sea would rise, and there would be famine and pestilence throughout the land. The stars would change in a most peculiar way so that the great ones could come pulsing from the outer gulf. Then the beasts would give tongue and prophecy in their anthropoglottism that man would perish. By these signs and other apocalyptic portents, the world would know that Nyarlathotep had returned. Soon he himself would be visible, a dark, faceless man in black, walking, staff in hand, across the desert, but leaving no track or mark his way, save that of death. For wherever his footsteps turned, men would surely die, until at last none but true believers remained to welcome him in worship with the mighty ones from the gulfs. Such, in his essence, was the fable of Nyarlathotep. It was older than secret Egypt, more hoary than sea-doomed Atlantis, more ancient than time-forgotten Mu. But it has never been forgotten. In the medieval times, this story and its prophecy were carried across Europe by returning crusaders. Thus, the mighty messenger became the Black Man of the witch covens, the emissary of Asmodeus and darker gods. His name is mentioned cryptically in the Necronomicon, for Alhazred the Mad heard it and whispered in tales of shadowed Irem. The fabulous book of Ebon hints at the myth in veiled and diverse ways, for it was writ in a far-off time when it was not yet deemed safe to speak of things that had walked upon the earth when it was young. Ludwig Prynne, who traveled in Saracenic lands and learned strange sorceries, awesomely implied his knowledge of the infamous Mysteries of the Worm in the book of the same title. But his worship in later years seems to have died out. There is no mention of it in Sir James Fraser's Golden Bough, and most reputable ethnologists and anthropologists are frankly ignorant of the Faceless One's history. But there are idols still intact, and some whisper of certain caverns beneath the Nile and of burrows beneath the ninth pyramid. The secret signs and symbols of his worship are gone, but there are some indecipherable hieroglyphs in the government vaults, which are very closely concealed, and men know. By word of mouth, the tale has come down through the ages, and there are those who still wait for the day. By common consent, there seem to be certain spots in the desert which are carefully avoided by caravans, and several secluded shrines are shunned by those with memories. For Nyarlathotep is the god of the desert, and his ways are best left unprofaned. It was this knowledge which prompted the uneasiness of the natives upon the discovery of that peculiar idol in the sand. When they had first noted the headdress, they had been afraid, and after seeing that featureless face, they became frantic with dread. As for Dr. Stuttgart, his face did not matter to them. They were concerned only with themselves, and their course was plainly apparent. They must flee, and flee at once. Stuttgart paid no attention to them. He was busy making plans for the following day. They would place the idol on a wheeled cart and harness the donkeys. Once back to the river, it could be put on board the steamer. What a find! It conjured up pleasant visions of the fame and fortune that would be his. Scavenger, was he? Unsavory adventurer, eh? Charlatan, cheat, imposter, they had called him. How those smug official eyes would pop when they beheld his discovery. Heaven only knew what vistas this thing might open up. There might be other altars, other idols, tombs and temples too. Perhaps, yes, many. He knew vaguely that there was some absurd legend about the worship of this deity, but if he could only get his hands on a few more natives who could give him the information he wanted, he smiled. He smiled musingly. Funny, all those superstitious myths. The boys were afraid of the statue. That was plainly apparent. The dragoman now with his stupid quotations. How did it go? Nyarlathotep is the black messenger of Carnerair. He comes from out of the desert, across the burning sands, and stalks his prey throughout the world, which is the land of his domain. Silly. All Egyptian myths were stupid. Statues with animal heads suddenly coming to life, reincarnations of men and gods, foolish kings building pyramids from mummies. Well, a lot of fools believed it, not only the natives either. They knew some cranks had credited their stories about the pharaoh's curse and the magic of the old priests. There were a lot of wild stories about the ancient tombs and the men who died when they invaded them. No wonder his own simple natives believed such trash. But whether they believed it or not, they were going to move his idol, damn them, even if they had to be shot down one by one to get the rest to obey. He went into his tent, well satisfied. The boy served him his meal, and Stuttgart dined heartily, as was his wont. Then he decided to retire early in anticipation of his plans for the following morning. The boys could tend to the camp, he decided. Accordingly, he lay down on his cot and soon fell into a contented, peaceful slumber. A little chapter break here. It must have been several hours later that he awoke. It was very dark, and the night was strangely still. Once he heard the faraway howl of a hunting jackal, but it soon blended into a somber silence. Surprised at his sudden awakening, Stuttgart rose and went to the door of the tent, pulling back the flap to gaze into the open. A moment later, he cursed in frenzied rage. The camp was deserted. The fire had died out. The men and camels had disappeared. Footprints, already half obliterated by the sands, showed the silent haste in which the natives had departed. The fools had left him here alone. He was lost. The knowledge sent a sudden stab of fear to his heart. Lost. The men were gone. The food was gone. The camels and donkeys had disappeared. He had neither weapons nor water and was all alone. He stood before the door of the tent and gazed, terrified, at the vast and lonely desert. The moon gleamed like a silver skull in an ebony sky. A sudden hot wind ruffled the endless ocean of sand and sent it skirling in tiny waves at his feet. Then came silence. Ceaseless silence. It was like the silence of the tomb, like the eternal silence of the pyramids, where in crumbling sarcophagi the mummies lie, their dead eyes gazing into unchanging and unending darkness. He felt indescribably small and lonely there in the night, and he was conscious of strange and baleful powers that were weaving the threads of his destiny into a final, tragic pattern. Nyarlathotep, he knew, and was wreaking an immutable vengeance. But, well, that was nonsense. He must not let himself be troubled by such fantastic rubbish. That was just another form of desert mirage, a common enough delusion under such circumstances. He must not lose his nerve now. He must face the facts calmly. The men had absconded with the supplies and the horses because of some crazy native superstition. That was real enough. As for the superstition itself, he must not let it bother him. Those frantic and morbid fancies of his would vanish quickly enough with the morning sun. The morning sun. A terrible thought assailed him. The fearsome reality of the desert at midday. To reach an oasis would be a force to travel day and night before the lack of food and water might weaken him so that he might not be able to go on. There would be no escape once he left this tent, no refuge from that pitiless blazing eye whose glaring rays could scorch his brain to madness. To die in the heat of the desert, that was an unthinkable agony. He must get back. His work was not yet completed. There must be a new expedition to recover the idol. He must get back. Besides, Stuttgart did not want to die. His fat lips quivered with fear as he thought of the pain, the torture. He had no desire to suffer the anguish of that fellow he had put on the rack. The poor devil had not looked very pleasant there. Oh, no, death was not for the doctor. He must hurry. But where? He gazed around frantically, trying to get his bearings. The desert mocked him with its monotonous, inscrutable horizon. For a moment, black despair clutched at his brain, and then came a sudden inspiration. He must go north, of course. As he recalled now the chance words let fall by the dragoman that afternoon. The statue of Nyarlathotep faced north. Jubilantly, he ransacked the tent for any remnants of food or provisions. There were none. Matches and tobacco he carried, and in his kit he found a hunting knife. He was almost confident when he left the tent. The rest of the journey would now be childishly simple. He would travel all night and make as much time as he could. His pack blanket would probably shield him from the noonday sun tomorrow, and in late afternoon he would resume his course after the worst of the heat had abated. By quick marches tomorrow night, he ought to find himself near the Wadi Hasur oasis upon the following morning. All that remained for him to do was to get out of the idol and set his course. Since the tracks of his party in the sand were already obscured. Triumphantly, he strode across the camp clearing to the excavation where the image stood. And it was there that he received his greatest shock. The idol had been reinterred. The workmen had not left the statue violated, but had completely filled in the excavation, even taking the precaution of placing the two original stones over the top. Stuttgart could not move them single-handed, and when he realized the extent of this calamity, he was filled with an overpowering dismay. He was defeated. Cursing would not do good. And in his heart, he did not even hope to pray, Nyarlathotep, Nyarlathotep, Lord of the desert. It was with a new and deathly fear that he began his journey, choosing a course at random and hoping against hope that the sudden clouds would lift so that he could have the guidance of the stars. But the clouds did not lift, and only the moon grinned grimly at the stumbling figure that struggled through the sand. Dervish dreams flitted through Stuttgart's consciousness as he walked. Try as he might, the legend of the god haunted him with a sense of impending fulfillment. Vainly he tried to force his drugged mind to forget the suspicions that tormented it, but he could not. Over and over again, he found himself shivering with fear at the thought of a godly wrath pursuing him to his doom. He had violated a sacred spot, and the old ones, well, they remembered. His ways are best left unprofaned, they said. God of the desert, that empty countenance. Stuttgart swore viciously and lumbered on a tiny ant amid mountains of undulating sand. Suddenly, it was daylight. The sand faded from purple to violet, then suddenly suffused with an orchid glow. But Stuttgart did not see it, for he slept. Long before he had planned, his bloated body had given way beneath the grueling strain, and the coming of dawn found him utterly weary and exhausted. His tired legs buckled under him, and he collapsed upon the sand, barely managing to draw the blanket over him before he slept. The sun crept across the brazen sky like a fiery ball of lava, pouring its molten rays upon the flaming sands. Stuttgart slept on, but his sleep was far from pleasant. The heat brought him queer and disturbing dreams. In them, he seemed to see the figure of Nyarlathotep pursuing him on a nightmare flight across the desert of fire. He was running over a burning plain, unable to stop, while searing pain ate into his charred and blackened fate. Behind him strode the faceless god, urging him onward with a staff of serpents. He ran on, but always with gruesome presence. That gruesome presence keeping pace behind him. His feet became numbed by the scorching agony of the sand. Soon he was hobbling on ghastly, crumpled stumps. But despite the torture, he dared not stop. The thing behind him cackled in diabolical mirth, his gigantic laughter rising to the blazing sky. Stuttgart was on his knees now, his crippled legs eaten away into ashy stumps that smoldered acridly even as he crawled. Suddenly, the desert became a lake of living flame into which he sank, his scorched body consumed by a blaze of livid, unendurable torment. He felt the sand lick pitilessly at his arms, his waist, his very throat, and still his dying senses were filled with the monstrous dread of the faceless one behind him, a dread transcending all pain. Even as he sank into that white-hot inferno, he was feebly struggling on. The vengeance of the god must never overtake him. Somehow, but the heat was overpowering him now. It was frying his cracked and bleeding lips, transforming his scorched body into one ghastly ember of burning anguish. He raised his head for the last time before his boiling brain gave way beneath the agony. There stood the Dark One, and even as Stuttgart watched, he saw the lean, taloned hands reach out to touch his fiery face, saw the dreadful triple-crowned head draw near to him, so that he gazed for one grisly moment into that empty countenance. As he looked, he seemed to see something in that black pit of horror, something that was staring at him from illimitable gulfs beyond, something with great flaming eyes that bored into his being with a fire and a fury greater than the fires that were consuming him. It told him wordlessly that his doom was sealed. Then came a burst of white-hot oblivion, and he sank into the seething sands, the blood bubbling in his veins. But the indescribable horror of that glimpse remained, and the last thing he remembered was the sight of that dreadful, empty countenance and the nameless fear behind it. And then he awoke. For a moment, his relief was so great that he did not notice the sting of the midday sun. Then, bathed in perspiration, he staggered to his feet and felt the stabbing rays bite into his back. He tried to shield his eyes and glance above to get his bearings, but the sky was a bowl of fire. Desperately, he dropped the blanket and began to run. The sand was clinging to his feet, slowing his pace and tripping him. It burned his heels. He felt an intolerable thirst. Already the demons of delirium danced madly in his head. He ran endlessly, and his dreams seemed to become a menacing reality. Was it coming true? His legs were scorched. His body was seared. He glanced behind. Thank God there was no figure there. Yet, perhaps, if he kept a grip on himself, he might still make it. In spite of the time he had lost, he raced on, perhaps a passing caravan. But no, it was far out of the caravan route. Tonight, the sunset would give him an accurate course. Yes, tonight. And damn the heat. Sand all around him, hills of sand, mountains of sand, all alike they were, like the crumbled cyclopean ruins of Titan cities long forgotten. All were burning, smoldering in the fierce heat. The day was endless, time ever an illusion, lost to all meaning. Stuttgart's weary body throbbed in bitter anguish, filling each moment with a new and deeper torment. The horizon never changed. No mirage marred the cruel, eternal vista. No shadow gave surcease from the savage glare. Oh, but wait. Was there not a shadow? A shadow behind him? Something dark and shapeless gloated at the back of his brain. His brain. A terrible thought pierced him with sudden realization. Narlotep, the god of the desert. A shadow following him, driving him to destruction. Those legends, the natives warned him. His dreams warned him. Even that dying creature on the rack. The mighty messenger always claims his own, a black man with a staff of serpents. He cometh from out of the desert, across the burning sands, and stalketh his prey throughout the land of his domain. Hallucination? Dared he look back? He turned his fever-addled head. Yes, it was true this time. There was something behind him, far away on the slope below, something black and nebulous that seemed to pad on stealthy feet. With a muttered curse, Stuttgart began to run. Why had he ever touched that image? If he got out of this, he would never return to the accursed spot again. The legends were true. God of the desert. He ran on, even though the sun showered bloody kisses on his brow. He was beginning to go blind. There were dazzling constellations whirling before his eyes, and his heart throbbed a shrieking rhythm in his breast. But in his mind there was room for but one thought alone: escape. His imagination began playing strange tricks. He seemed to see statues in the sand, statues like the one he had profaned. Their shapes towered everywhere, writhing, giant-like, rising out of the ground and confronting him with eerie menace. Some were in attitudes with wings outspread. Others were tentacled and snake-like, but all were faceless and triple-crowned. He felt that he was going mad until he glanced back and saw that creeping figure now only a half-mile behind. Then he staggered on, screaming incoherently at the grotesque eidolons barring his way. The desert seemed to take on a hideous personality, as though all nature were conspiring to conquer him. The contorted outlines of the sand became imbued with malignant consciousness. The very sun took on an evil life. Stuttgart moaned deliriously. Would night never come? It came, at last. But by that time, Stuttgart did not know it anymore. He was a shambling, raving thing, wandering over the shifting sand, and the rising moon looked down on a thing that alternately howled and laughed. Presently, the figure struggled to its feet and glanced furtively over its shoulder at a shadow that crept close. Then it began to run again, shrieking over and over again the single word, "Narlotep!" And all the while, the shadow lurked just a step behind. It seemed to be embodied with a strange and fiendish intelligence, for the shapeless adubration carefully drove its victim forward in one definite direction, as if purposefully herding it toward an intended goal. The stars now looked upon a sight spawned of delirium. A man chased across endlessly looming sands by a black shadow. Presently, the pursued one came to the top of a hill and halted with a scream. The shadow paused in midair and seemed to wait. Stuttgart was looking down at the remains of his own camp, just as he had left it the night before, with the sudden, awful realization now that he had been driven in a circle back to his starting point. Then, with the knowledge, came a merciful mental collapse. He threw himself forward in one final effort to elude the shadow and raced straight for the 2 stones where the statue was buried. Then occurred that which he had feared, for even as he ran, the ground before him quaked in the throes of a gigantic upheaval. The sand rolled in vast, engulfing waves away from the base of the 2 boulders. Through the opening rose the idol, glistening evilly in the moonlight, and the oncoming sand from its base caught Stuttgart as he ran toward it, sucking at his legs like a quicksand and yawning at his waist. At the same instant, the peculiar shadow rose and leaped forward. It seemed to merge with the statue in midair, a nebulous, animate mist. Then Stuttgart, floundering in the grip of the sand, went quite mad with terror. The formless statue gleamed, living in the livid light, and the doomed man stared straight into its unearthly countenance. It was his dream come true, for behind that mask of stone, he saw a face with eyes of yellow madness, and in those eyes, he read death. The black figure spread its wings against the hills and sank into the sand with a thunderous crash. Thereafter, nothing remained above the earth save a living head that twisted on the ground and struggled futilely to free its imprisoned body from the iron embrace of the encircling sand. Its imprecations turned to frantic cries for mercy, then sank to a sob in which echoed the single word, Nyarlathotep. When morning came, Stuttgart was still alive, and the sun baked his brain into a hell of crimson agony. But not for long. The vultures winged across the desert plain and descended upon him, almost as if supernaturally summoned. Somewhere, buried in the sands below, an ancient idol lay, and upon its featureless countenance there was the faintest hint of a monstrous, hidden smile. For even as Stuttgart, the unbeliever, died, his mangled lips paid whispered homage to Nyarlathotep, Lord of the desert. Hardly any dialogue in that. That was quite something to read. Now, I don't know when this was published. Let's see if I can find out. I'll have to look it up. And you can see, this is Robert Bloch, the guy who wrote Psycho. It's wild to think that he was really into Lovecraft stuff. Whoa. Hold on a second. This was published in May 1936 in Weird Tales. Whoa. Yeah, The Faceless God. First published in Weird Tales magazine, May 1936. And he had another one published the next month, June. Wow. And then another one in October, another one in November. So remember, Robert Bloch wrote to H.P. Lovecraft when he was a teenager. And I think he got his first story published when he was a teenager, because he was a massive fan of Lovecraft and Robert E. Howard. And of course, Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, they wrote to each other. C.L. Moore wrote, they were all part of the circle. Clark Ashton Smith and Robert Bloch entered that circle. And then shortly after Robert Bloch, then you get people like, discussed it here before, my friend William F. Nolan, William Clayton Johnson, George Clayton Johnson, and then other people like a few years after that, Harlan Ellison and some of those guys. And then some of the hard SF guys, like Harlan did horror and SF, and so did George and Bill. And then sort of a little bit after that were F. Paul and Tom Monteleone, those guys. That's quite a wild one. And it's interesting because, that one didn't have much of a shocker to it, but it still was quite gripping. It was really, that was very interesting. That's the sort of thing that I bet he was pretty young when he wrote that. Let me think. Let me find out when he was born. So that was 1936. I'm going to look this up on Fantastic Fiction, see if I can find out for y'all. I'm going to go to FF right here. Just hop on over here and go to Robert Bloch. Oops, sorry about that. Robert Bloch. There we go. Okay. 1917. Yeah. So 1936. So he was 19. Wow, he's getting all those stories, right? Yeah, he was 19 years old. Wow, man. That's intense. His stuff became, obviously more sophisticated, and he still did some of the Lovecraftian stuff, but obviously he started to get into the human threat, the mental pathology stuff with Psycho 2, Psycho House, and stuff like that. He did some other ones too that were sort of along those lines. Wow, man, that was wild. Hey, let me do this for you. Let's check out some of your comments on the screen, everybody, and just give you this. By the way, I want to let you know, I didn't mention it while I was doing the reading. Actually, I'll tell you after. Lord of the Desert, says Yona. Have you ever heard that song, Lord of the Hornets, by that dude who was in Hawkwind? Lord of the Hornets. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, hey, cool. Boy, Birdhouse has got a lot here. Thanks. Yeah, you can see it on the screen. That was a high-octane horror story. 1936. Unbelievable, says Birdhouse. Fascinating bio on Robert Bloch. Literally killer timeline. He was born in Chicago, Illinois. He was the son of Raphael Ray Bloch, a bank cashier, and Stella Loeb, a social worker, another famous author born in Chicago. Yeah. You know what I've got a novel that it's actually got Ambrose Bierce as the main character. When he was up in San Francisco, he did a lot of writing for one of the Hearst papers up there in San Francisco. And it was he ended up going from there over, he tried to open a gold mine out, I think it was like Virginia or Pennsylvania or something, and sort of didn't do well in that, went back to San Francisco, but then it ended up going down to Mexico for the Mexican Civil War. And but he never came back. But it's interesting because I've never been a fan of taking real people and putting them into fictional things that much. Like if you read The List of Seven and The Six Messiahs by Mark Snow, who's the co-creator of Twin Peaks, that has Arthur Conan Doyle as the main character. And that's actually really good. It's essentially a Sherlock Holmes thing, and there was a TV series not connected to the Mark Snow novels that has Doyle and the doctor upon whom he sort of based Holmes when he was a practicing physician in Scotland. And it was actually from Arthur Conan Doyle that I learned about how drowning victims typically don't drown because their lungs fill with water. They typically drown from asphyxiation because their larynx closes up. And it's the same thing with people who die of asphyxiation in hot fires. The body goes into this autonomic reflex response where the trachea just goes like that and seizes up. You can't get anything in. And it's very interesting to see that sort of thing. And I think he based one of the, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, Conan Doyle is a fascinating guy. And if you do get a chance to read the Mark Snow novels with Conan Doyle as the main character, they're good. They're really good. And he hits the whole occult, Madame Blavatsky, seance vibe, theosophism or whatever. He gets all that stuff too. Very interesting stuff. But anyway, let me do this before I go. Because so Robert Bloch is dead, but what would be really interesting is to write a short story that might have Robert Bloch as the main character, maybe involved with, signing a contract for one of his bigger things. And maybe he looks at one of the old communications that he had with Lovecraft or something like that as he's going, and he finds out there's some dark hidden secret that these people knew, that this stuff was real or something. It would be a short story with Robert Bloch as the main character. That would be interesting. You could do some cool stuff with that. So one thing I want to do though is I want to read you a little bit more of the story fuel that I've been working on which I've been working. And again, I'm going to finish Tower. It's just been so crazy. As I said, the mayhem with all the news and stuff. This is the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel, and we're hoping to, do more of that. But it has been absolutely crazy with all the news stuff and everything. So I'm going to go with, I'm going to start again on fuel, okay? If you don't mind, I'm just going to read it again from the start, okay? Because I've added some cool stuff to it, I think, anyway. Fuel. This is the hard science fiction one. I've seen things in this journey, things I never imagined, things I never will forget. Here, swimming through the depthless cold of space, I've been blessed. Through life-protecting plexi, densely packed, my cornea have absorbed the most dazzling and most subtle dances of light, the most breathtaking creations of God. Human eyes, likewise, God created, witnessing the once invisible, once unattainable creations in the sky. The jagged, frozen wastes of the belt, the broad clouds of particles murmuring like space starlings in the wake of our advance, the splintered sunlight rising and reaching through spokes of misty, deadly, ice-bouldered rings, refracting, defraying, orange, vermilion, and rose, past Neptune and across Saturn's eye. Oil, gold, laid out in 3 infinite dimensions, the most precious of gifts. And yet, I knew from day one that I was not cut out for this space, this place, where suits are helmeted and fueled and heated and cooled, guarding against the stark reality that surrounds this tiny can of rivets and rust, which would freeze or blow out our veins in seconds. I miss the rain. I miss the natural flow of air. Even a slight breeze, something random and unexpected would do. But here, all is artificial sameness, grounded in steely silence, and in the unnatural silence lurking everlong beyond the shell that our engines propel, between the roids and across the void. I realized this early as I assimilated the first seconds, minutes, and artificial days aboard the ship. But I suppose I suspected as much in the weeks prior, when I summoned my resolve and bit that proverbial bullet and decided, for money's sake, to put my feet aboard the radiomonic bullet and make a little dosh to get back on my proverbial feet. Johnson, well, I early could see that he was a different sort. In the grand family tree of man, his branch and mine had taken altogether different paths. One might never know when and never fathom where, but he was quite a different breed. For Johnson, the wanderlust was fuel and scientific curiosity the mental meal. I couldn't understand, even as we met and hammered out our roles as pilot and co, why he didn't feel his teeth go on edge, just thinking about the fact that we were trapped, sealed in a composite of compartments that were surrounded by an ocean of death. If the overworked, underworldly engineers had screwed up, if the calculators had miscalculated by the tiniest fraction of a millimeter as we navigated, if one of the air systems went down, or the heat decided to give us the cold shoulder, that was it. Slow, dissipating, crushing, icy death as we became one with the surrounds of space. And if the rockets got too hot, if our radioactive coal furnace threw off more energy than the Chaipov shielding and our special meds could repel or convert, we'd have to spangle our shortened lives with a lot more glitter and buy our carbonized caskets early to well prepare. How other people couldn't feel these feelings or think these thoughts virtually every moment one accelerated, adjusted, awoke to the phony photons inside the rubber-belted tube, or checked the screens and fuel, I just couldn't understand. But Johnson and I, we were different. And in a way, I suppose that was good, because without his seeming nonchalance, the chalice of our mineral winnings wouldn't have been sufficient for me to last that single strident space job I had decided to take from Pluto to Earth. So you can imagine my surprise and sense of unease upon seeing his furrowed brow and hawk-like stare focusing on the nav, as if he were staring into a confounding abyss when I climbed into the bridge circle. "What's up?" He shook his head, turned to the right of the screen, scanned a second smaller display, gaudily showing a set of scrolling digits that ended in something red, and hovered over it, evidently unaware of the fact that his usual avian features now glowed like the face of Mars, bringer of war. "Anomaly, I think. Something's pretty damn close to our path, according to the multiplier. About," he glanced at the visualizer, then at the digits, "about 6 C-clicks. Damn, you kidding me? It wasn't noted by the nav rammers when they plotted the course?" Johnson just shook his head. "Jesus." After a moment's study and what seemed like a dive into imaginative contemplation, he straightened in his swivel chair and put his hands on either side of the first screen, tilting his head up toward the air ducts. "It could be something new, shrapnel after an asteroid collision that shot out along a new vector, but whatever it is, it's too close to our path to risk it." "Damn, man, a reroute?" His sharp eyes fixed on the screen as if it were an insult, and he pulled one side of his thin lips. "At least we have time to change course, but you know how it is when even a slight correction becomes part of the path. One decision leads to another, especially this close to the belt." "Damn." I sunk my butt into the co-seat beside him and strapped in. "I'll set about the changes if you're cool with notifying the chain about this new object," he said. "Can do," I replied, with a bit of whimsy swirled into my anger frappe. "Okay if I add some expletives for their binary delivery?" Well, sometimes differences weren't so different for us after all. "And be my guest, Shakespeare." I nodded, and he slid his chair along the rail until he reached the nav rack and its lovely little configuration of skull cap, wires, and skin pads that had been installed for easy, hands-free waveform access to the ever-so-boring, pornography-lacking Intel system. While I dictated the message, that silent synapse connector would welcome him with measured words and images only his mind could hear and see. I didn't like that part of the job either. I preferred to input the changes in the old-fashioned way, without opening my skull to ions flowing from the rack. Nothing against our technographic computer cohabitants aboard the SS Mission Creep, as we jokingly called our freighter, originally christened the Fishin' Reap back at HQ. But while Johnson seemed to take to swimming in the sea serum of zeros and ones, I found it literally and euphemistically unnerving. There again was that difference between us. And we were different in the way we viewed the serum, too. That funky fluid they told us to hypo every day in order to stop any overhot jet radiation, giving us a couple extra heads. It didn't give him a moment of worry. But I had to summon my quite limited courage every time I sat in the leather automed chair. So, yeah. Johnson didn't worry about injecting, and likewise, I knew he didn't think I'd stream a line of expletives at the home team. I was just expressing an idle fancy, and even if I sent some invective, which I wouldn't do, no one of any significance would hear. The way the Corpor Nation had set up the command structure and comms, we sent our little lightspeed dispatches not to headquarters on Earth, but to the relays along the chain. Home base had to trust them to handle the signals from the most distant ships kind of like manned buoys on a starlit sea, and had to trust their command structure to make the right decisions in case of emergency. The farther away any of us were from a buoy, the longer it took to send and receive, meaning that sometimes we'd be on our own to make exigent decisions. It made no sense to rile up the relay boys because they had nothing to do with the original plan. More important, I wasn't sure how hungry Johnson was to sup on the system. Being low in the cast, nearly lowest of the low, save for some of the lifers in Pluto's megropolis, who ceaselessly toiled beneath the 6 nuclear satellite suns to supply the gatherer enough Telmars to pay for a proper memorial when they died, well, I never entertained any deranged dreams that I'd move up the ziggurat sufficiently to own any property or get corporate stripes. Deep in my not tied to computers mind, I harbored a desire to disappear, perhaps to deal in the budding gray markets for food and meals, maybe even buy one of the scatterers that I'd heard some techies were developing to trick all the algorithmic overlords. I'd never outright asked him, but Johnson wasn't new to the shipping game, and he seemed interested in at least a few more runs. So, despite my stark awareness of the fact that this anomaly in our path had been overlooked by the lords, and regardless of my frustration over the fact that a nav change would force us to do a whole series of extra calcs to avoid obstacles on the new route, and despite knowing that we'd have to recalc our deceleration point when we'd be at equilib and 0G, and we'd set the auto rotor to flip our standing orientation to use the decel to mimic 1G, and the 9th day midway would become a 10th or 11th day. Well, I wasn't going to rock the space boat if Johnson thought he would be able to make what some might call a good career in the corporate world. We were pissants, but we were different enough from one another on enough levels to give me pause before I did something rash that could screw up his plans. He was good at his job, too, reflected by the fact that by the time I completed the dictation and made sure the message was sent, Johnson had completed not only the new first-level adjustments, but the entire reroute, and the ship was subtly changing course, something I could feel in my chest and see through the portals. Like a mercurial lady friend, her mind and actions were diverging from the original plan. So I clicked my mic and headset into the holder and asked him how it looked for the midpoint. And he pointed at his little screen. Says here 3 more days. After our initial reroute, the nav had to compensate to avoid an undetected edge scatter from the orbital zone near Uranus. You think another ship stirred up this thing in our path? Tough to tell. I'd have to get access to the whole line's charts and then start doing the reverse vector analysis to see what might have hit this thing or pushed it or pulled it. He briefly moved his hand in a brushing gesture. Not into that right now. We let the silence of outer space fill the inner space. Then he put both hands together and pointed at me with pressed indexed fingers. I'm hungry. Want to grab some stuff? Sounds good. Little chapter break. Well, man, I told him as I theatrically dabbed the corners of my lips with my tie-dye bandana, one of the few natural things the Corporal Nation had let me bring aboard the Fission. Can't say that was satisfying, but it's a hell of an improvement over the protein pills. He ran an index finger along the inside of his plastic bowl and sucked the brown, gravy-like remnants into his mouth. Agreed. With what I saw as unjustified enthusiasm, he repeated the process, speaking as he cleaned out and consumed the last smears of goo. Gotta say, I've been kind of impressed with the way the dispensers can turn the same raw material into different things. This cell culture stuff can be pudding or baked into a loaf or coated with some oil and fried into things almost like French fries. I saw a guy on Bar Tome 3 make a curry and rice thing out of it. One final lick of the magic finger. I prefer the real deal, but yeah, compared to that stretch orbiting the Megropolis and waiting for the contract, this is a big step up. He swiveled away from the little wall-attached table and stowed the bowl and spoon back in the rinse-o-vac niche, where the two fingernail-sized red lights on the side panel automatically turned green, the lid closed, and the machine went to work cleaning the dinnerware. Since Johnson and I like to keep the mess lit in a twilight blue tone, the effect was like tiny Christmas lights flashing on and off at dusk. Christmas lights. Just about that time of what we used to call a year. 2.5 billion miles away. He was wiping his finger on his shirt when he turned back to me and lassoed a look of curiosity around my little pet handkerchief. I've been meaning to ask you, Nick, where you got that. Something of a memorial. Indirectly, anyway. Dave Trent gave it to me as a little something extra after I brought him that apple hooch. And he got it from Wilkerson's team before they headed out last year. He'd worked on their thrust capacitor, so they made him an unofficial member of the crew. I think all 10 of the guys had one of these, and they used to wear them around almost everywhere. He tightened his lips, nodding, as his eyes did a kind of slide to the floor. And too bad about those guys. Yeah, all the more reason to be sure we secure a totally clean flight pass. He nodded again, clearly adrift on a sea of thoughts. Did you ever see any of those old Western shows, man? The 2D cowboy flicks and black and white TV? Yeah. I remember loving those as a kid, thinking about traveling on the range and all that. The new frontiers and the riches awaiting, ripe for the taking. If someone worked hard enough, driving cattle or delivering goods, sleeping out on the range with a can of beans and a campfire and a canopy of stars in the sky. He glanced out the window. Not the same. And with that, and looking uncharacteristically tired, he pushed himself up and glanced at his watch. I'm going to catch a nap. You good on your own for an hour? Sure, Johnson, I can manage. Cool. I'll set my alarm, but feel free to nudge me if you need something. Then he ducked through the door port and headed down the pass to the sleep block. I watched him go, thinking, or to be more precise, sensing, that it was the first time I'd ever seen him acting anything other than neutral or positive about the vast, sprawling system of worker bees, plans, and decisions that tied so many of us, alive and dead, together across the rock-littered void. Little chapter break. Tea leaves were, of course, still available to us, perhaps as a little vestigial tie to the early days of colonialism that saw the new mercantilist behemoths of British wool interests that had battled the Dutch for control of sea routes, land routes, cities, towns, small local business concerns in the Indies, and inevitably the people themselves. That had seen the movement of tea and spices and opium and gold and the upward fortunes of parliament members and cronies and the downward slide of morals and ethics. Well, Earl Grey might have made a heck of a citrus-tinged brew, but he wasn't exactly a blessing for the locals in Goa. Of course, those days were centuries gone, co-opted by time and terror, and terms of various offices, and timorous generations cowering and bowing before beady-eyed blusterers who told them to pay for the armies and police forces that threatened them. Corporate political shakedowns had come and gone, and old banking institutions had been baked into new ones and tied to new fascist ventures. Plutonians had tried to rise in defiance decades before I learned to walk, but they'd lost the gambit and gotten tea bags in consolation, brought to them like little flags of victory from the new colonialists. And I don't know whether it's healthy to contemplate hundreds of years of mercantilism while fixing a cuppa, but I did. And when the tea had steeped and the steam had spread from my little porcelain mug with the pine tree on it up into the air and to my needly nostrils, I withdrew the bag and squeezed out the thickest mix, then left the bag on the rubber saucer to be reused at a later date. Then I brought it close to my face, left my chair to cool, and headed back to the bridge. The route took me past the sleep chamber, and I noticed that Johnson hadn't nestled into his bunk, but was sitting on the slim after-foam mattress and the covers the corporation had so kindly provided. I was set to walk by, but something in his hand gave me pause. Even from across the 10-foot space, I could see that it was one of those old-time physical photos. And I guess my hesitation caught his eye because he looked up and turned to face me. "Old girlfriend?" I asked. "Nah, man." He rose and brought it to me. "I found it in one of those books the runners left in the stow." He showed it to me. Not a girl, that was certain. It was a pic of 4 young guys, all in uniformly new blue boiler suits, all with regulation haircuts and regulation smiles, side by side, arms over each other's shoulders, near the ramp for the ship, in some port that kind of reminded me of Titan 16. But there was a fish and chip shop in the distance, past the steam and the bundled multitudes streaming between them and the merchant area. Who? I think it's the crew of the Helena Howe. Something sharp knifed my spine. The HH. I accepted his offer to look more closely in the better light of the corridor, and the 4 eager, anticipatory faces smiled up at me through the years. Their story was legendary. 4 heroes lost in the cold and salty sea of space when I was a toddler, I thought. Didn't they abandon ship? He nodded, and I remembered. Never found again. The life pod signal kept people guessing for months because it kept bouncing around the asteroid belt, but nobody could find them. I think that either this book came from the HH after being resold at one of the markets, or suddenly it hit me, or this is the Helena Howe. Again, a nod. I bet it is. I think they refurbished it, fixed the frazzed heating system that went down on those guys, and put it back into use to save some cash. With tech improvements, they don't need 4 guys to ride it, just 2. And that's what I've got so far. HH. The heat got screwed up on that ship. Harry Hart, there you go. Harry Hart. I did that on purpose, Harry, by the way. That's for you. Oh, thanks, Birdhouse. He says, I don't know how Gar does it, but he makes fiction come alive. Thank you so much. Hey, you know what? I'm going to show that on the screen, I think. I don't know. Maybe I already scrolled past, but thanks, man. That was really nice of you to say. That's super cool. Let's see. I don't even know where we are right now, but yeah, there you go. Thanks, Birdhouse. Yeah, it's a great connection, you guys. Thank you so much. So just to let you know, guys, while I was in the Robert Bloch story, it started getting cold in here. So like I said, this is my brother's house, and this happened once before I could connect my phone to the Wi-Fi. During Christmas time, they were away, and the oil burner stopped working. And it was like really cold. And they had a couple cats, and they have a wood stove. And so my brother asked me to stay with the cats and get the wood stove going, and the oil guy would come like the next day. The next day was, I think, like Christmas Eve or something like that. And by midday, I had to help my sister pick up her car before the shop closed over in Manchester. So I left here, and during the night, I had the fire going. During the night, it got down to 40 degrees where I was sleeping on the couch. And I am just hoping that it's just something that like reset on the thermometer. Because if they ran out of oil, or if there's another problem with the oil burner, I do not want that. Like, that was one of those experiences where it's like, I am so glad I don't ever want to go through that one again. That was awful. And I don't know. It's feeling kind of chilly, and I'm going to go check and see what's going on. Liberty Conspiracy Studio 2 Deep Freeze Edition. Taylor. Oh, thanks, Taylor. He says, I look forward to more aboard the HH. Yeah, this is going to be a good one. And I got a bunch of other story ideas too. I mean, really, I should be writing a lot more of the fiction stuff, and I got to do the fundraiser for the publishing company because it's just, there's so much stuff that I've already written, and really that's most of my avocation. That's where I really did. That's where I've got my work and my skill set. With the political stuff and everything like that. I'm conversant on that stuff, but my writing abilities are really where I worked, and I took chances and stuff and really went out there. So yeah, I got to get that going. But anyway, all right. I'm broadcasting from Siberia, says Jason. You guys are great. All right, guys, I better get going. I better check on this stuff. It's going on 10 o'clock, so I better catch this in case something's going on. So I'll talk to you later. Thank you. God bless, guys. I'll be watching Nights of the Storm. Don't know where I'll be. Hopefully I'll be here. We got a storm coming in too. It's going to be slick driving. So I don't know what's going to be going on. Oh man. Uncle Sam, where are you? The ghost of Uncle Sam. Please. I'm dying in space. Take care, you guys. Thank you, Jason. God bless you guys. And and by the way, again, if you can put your mind to the good websites for doing a fundraiser to try to get $5,000 or $6,000 over the course of like a 30-day period with some incentives to give people things if they do donate, like $100 or something like that, that would be really great. So got to figure that out. As a Give Send Go would be one. I don't know. I'll try to look it up. I'll try to figure it out. But if you guys have suggestions, that's great. And I really appreciate everybody being here. Again, if you want to contribute to just, for the daily Liberty Conspiracy stuff, or you want to do something for former Star Trek writing fellow, just go to my Substack and you can sign up at my Substack, and that's a great way to do it. Or you can donate over at, where, my friends, over at the Rumble Land. So yeah, I like the way the story's coming out. It's going to be great. And wait till you get the ending. Like I said, I always know the endings and then I reverse engineer it. So it's going to be intense. It's going to be intense. And by the way, if you get a chance, look up some of the great comments. This is a little tip of the hat to Jason Barker and his great and very solid appreciation for Stargate. And many of you might also like Stargate as well. Brad Wright was one of the two co-creators of Stargate. He comes from Canada. I think he used to live in Ottawa, did theatrical writing at first, and then went over to Vancouver and worked with Trilogy Entertainment, which was the Outer Limits branch off from Joe Stefano's creation. They, did it. They redid it for, was it Showtime? So Brad, it's a super nice guy. If you get a chance, check out, and Jason, you might have already seen some of these. Check out some of Harry Dean Anderson. Is that it? Harry Dean, the guy from Stargate and MacGyver. He is on, they have some clips on YouTube now of him talking about his time at Stargate. And there are some clips where he's mentioning Brad. And he just has such great things to say about Brad. And I cannot tell you, Brad Wright, Wright, is one of the nicest guys that I have ever met in this industry, or in the television industry. Absolutely great. Such a nice guy. And Brian Fuller was also extremely nice to me when I went over to Star Trek. And Brandon Baga is a good guy too. And so, yeah, if you ever get a chance and you ever are able to watch a live stream with Brad Wright or hear news about Brad, just remember he is one of the salt of the earth people. He's a really good guy. Just can never say enough things. The last night when I was leaving Outer Limits, it was pouring rain. And I was getting ready to drive. I was going to stay over at night and then leave early in the morning and go down, across the border the next morning. And it was pouring rain. And Brad had looked at my first spec script that I had written for Star Trek, which was one of them that actually ended up getting ripped off, not by Brad, by somebody else. And it was the Ponfar one. And I'll never forget, Brad was in his car. It was pouring rain. He had his window down. He had gone through the script for me. And somebody else's car lights were on, and it was flashing on him. You could see the raindrops coming down super hard. Of course, it's Vancouver. It's raining there all the time. And I'll never forget, he looked up at me, had his arm out the window. He goes, "Guard, you can do this. You can do this. You can write." And that was great. That was super cool. So God bless you, Brad Wright, and God bless all of you. Good people. Wow. It's wild. God bless the generations ahead of us who are just trying to make livings, and they created great stories. Lots more great stories to come. I'm going to leave you with the Outer Limits. God bless.
We now return control of your television set to you until next week at this same time, when the control voice will take you to the Outer Limits.